Welcome to CAS110, Creative Processes. This is going to be an intense 7-week online class on creativity and on the creative process, and you're going to learn a lot during this 7-week half semester in the summer. And I'm also going to be challenged to try to be creative in how to deliver this class to you in an online environment. So I guess what we should do is start a little bit with a discussion of, well, so what is this class all about? What is creativity? What is creativity all about? You know, it was Justice Potter Stewart, when they asked him once about pornography, he said, well, I don't know how to define it, but I sure know it when I see it. And then I think the same kind of holds true for creativity. It's kind of tough to define sometimes, but at the same time, we know it when we see it. We see something that's dramatic departure from the past, something that kind of knocks our socks off, something that really is spectacular. We say, wow, that's creative. Now, part of the challenge in this class is that what are our goals? Are we just going to be dazzled by creative things? Well, that's part of it. We're going to identify some examples of excellence. But in addition, this class is also designed to help us sort of parse out, what do we know about creativity? How do we help somebody become more creative? Are some people just naturally more creative than others? Are there things we can do to enhance our own creativity? Why does creativity matter in today's society? One of the things we do know is that a lot of employers nowadays really look for people who are creative. We also use the term creative in other ways. We call the people, for example, in advertising who do the things like make the videos or put together the storyboards, they're called the creatives. They're on the creative side. It means they're the ones who do the creative things, and the people on the business side are the account executives and the accountants and the sales staff and all the people who do those other jobs. So since you're in the College of Communication Arts and Sciences, the assumption is that in one of these fields, advertising, public relations, journalism, all of these fields, retailing maybe, that you're interested in learning more about how you can become a more creative individual and what kinds of creative skills and techniques do you need to learn to be able to be useful in the work world. And the other thing we're going to talk about and learn in this class is how you're creative in a group. And that can sometimes be pretty daunting. Most work environments nowadays really don't require that sort of individual genius. They don't even know how to accommodate them very often, but they require people who know how to collaborate with each other. People who can accept criticism, people who can put their ideas out there and have a tough enough skin that other people can pick them apart without them falling apart. Now, the good news in this class is part of our goal is to help you get comfortable with being creative, learn how to express your ideas, and do so in a welcoming environment. So for our purposes, even though it might not be as efficient or in some ways as effective, the climate for this class, and we're going to talk a little bit about creating a climate for the class, is we want to be accepting. We want to accept everybody's ideas. We know that some of the ideas that we all throw out are going to be thrown out later, but let's not be quick to do that. Let's give everybody an opportunity to stretch their wings and try some things that are new and express themselves in ways that maybe they've been afraid to before. And let's make sure that we don't jump on one another. Let's make ourselves sort of subscribe to a code of conduct where we are very welcoming of new ideas. I know that I will be, because the goal in this class is not to grade you on the basis of how creative you are, but it's, are you willing to try new things? Are you going to be exploring the opportunities to learn more about creativity? Are you willing to do the hard work that it takes to try to develop the strategies that help you become more creative? And are you willing to do things in groups so that sometimes that means holding your ego in check, other times it means assuming a leadership role. It means sometimes doing tasks you're not that fond of just to make sure the project gets done. Those are all the things that we hope to learn about along the way. Now, one of the things that scientists talk about sometimes when they talk about creativity is the difference between left brain and right brain thinking, and that's one of the concepts we're going to sort of grapple with here in this class. The idea is that you have these two hemispheres of your brain and that they operate differently, and they each have their own strengths and their own sort of weaknesses maybe, or limitations. Now, it's an oversimplification, but the idea is that the left hemisphere of the brain is the one that's sort of logical, analytical, very interested in accuracy, and that the right side of your brain is the one that's more interested in aesthetics and feelings and emotions, and it's more creative. So part of what we're going to try to do in this course is help you learn some strategies that are going to free you up so that you become a more creative, you tap into that creative side of yourself. I think many of you know that when you were asked as a kid maybe to take a look at a certain constellation in the sky or take a look at the North Star, it was easier sometimes if you didn't quite look at it directly. If you looked off to the side a little bit, you saw the star more clearly than if you looked at it directly. We learn that the rods and cones in our retinas are designed so that if we're a little bit off, we tend to sometimes see the stars a little bit more clearly. And I think that kind of goes for learning how to let that creative side of our brains come out and play with us on occasion. You know, some of the best ideas I've ever had have been in the shower in the morning when I'm just sort of foggy and my brain isn't completely awake. And all of a sudden, you know, if I'm working on a book or something, all sorts of great ideas bubble up. You know, I'm busy sudsing and you'd think I would be just completely dead to the world, but all of a sudden a different side of my brain sort of takes over and I come up with these great ideas. The only problem is I usually don't have a pad or pencil or even a recorder on a cell phone to take those ideas down at that time. Sometimes by the time I stumble out of the shower, I've forgotten them. But one of the things I'm going to ask you to do in this class is to try to find the things that work for you to free up that level of creativity. There is a gentleman that I'm very fond of, and his name is Richard Louv, L-O-U-V, and he has talked about NDD, nature deficit disorder. And he says that people nowadays are just not as connected to nature as they should be, because nature is a great refresher. It helps us become more creative. It opens up that creative part of our brain, the sort of nurturing and, you know, and warm and emotional part of our brain. So he suggests that you should spend at least 15 minutes a day walking around in nature, that it will change the way you think. And I do believe that, you know, it would be advisable for you in this class to spend 15 minutes a day and think about some of your assignments and think about what you're doing and see if you generate more ideas in that environment than you do when you're struggling to sit there and focus in front of the computer. Think about the opportunity to get out into nature and let it open up that part of your brain. See if that works. When you have ideas like that, come back in and post something on your Pinterest board. You'll see in the syllabus that you need to post a Pinterest board for the class where you keep it as a journal. It's going to be your personal journal, even though it's going to be public, so you can't be too personal. You might want to set up a private one in addition. But in the public journal, you might capture an image somewhere. You may take your own photograph and post it to Pinterest and put a comment below. Or you might find something online that expresses what it is that you felt when you were out there in nature and you saw something and it sparked an idea or it gave you some ideas. So make sure to try to find the things in your own life that help you spark that creative impulse. You should also use that Pinterest board for some class notes. I mean, mark that down. Take a look. I want to look up Richard Louv, L-O-U-V, and nature deficit disorder, and look a little bit more into that. Maybe you find something interesting and you post something interesting about that to your Pinterest board. Think of that as your journal, as the place to capture some of your more creative ideas when you try to shake off some of that left brain thinking and let your right brain come out to play. This class is going to cover a variety of different approaches and strategies that you're going to use. Some are things like, well, there's a term called forced association, where you sort of throw a monkey wrench into a project by adding a new element that makes you rethink all your assumptions. We're going to go through in the upcoming week sort of a laundry list of a lot of these different types of techniques and strategies that you can use to try to add a level of creativity to the work that you're doing. Brainstorming and problem solving and how those different techniques work and what you can do to try to make those processes more valuable and more productive. There are going to be some fun exercises too with things like using technology. This is one of the digital Media Sandbox series, and so that means that you are to have your hardware and software that allows you to do some creative things. You can put together little iMovies and take images and have software to manipulate some of these things and play with this. It's an opportunity to do some play before you get into the sort of advanced classes where it's all very serious work. We're going to take a look at techniques in terms of storytelling. Part of what I think is a challenge nowadays is realizing that almost every field demands a level of storytelling. You know, stories have a beginning, a middle, and an end. And they have what are called arcs, where the tension rises and something's going to happen, and then there's the denouement where something occurs and it changes the arc of the story. It goes like this and woo, it may take another turn that way. So we're going to look at some of those techniques, because I don't care whether you're in advertising or you're in public relations or you're in journalism. The challenge nowadays is to apply some of these creative techniques to the projects that you'll be working on. Obviously, advertising has always been an immensely creative field. Public relations, now in a digital world, even more so. If you want me to save the whales, you have to show me why I care and why I want to save the whales. Maybe you're in PR where you're working for a corporation, and maybe that new model car they just brought out has a little bit of a problem and the engines catch on fire. Well, how are you going to assure the public and calm them and tell them that you're working on the problem and that you have it under control? What strategies do you have to try to tell that story to a broader audience and make it believable and make yourself trustworthy in the process? We'll talk a little bit about how these techniques apply to journalism. Journalism nowadays is reinventing itself in this digital world, and we can tell stories in so many different ways. What piece of the story will you tell in video? What will you tell in a slideshow? What will you tell in an image? What will you tell in text? What other stories will you link to? There's so many different ways to sort of take a story, tear it apart, and refashion it as a new package online to be able to tell us about the news. It's a great era, and what this course is designed to do is to give you some of the tools, techniques, and approaches that you need to be able to be successful in those realms. Now I'm going to read you a few definitions of creativity. Creativity. So what is creativity? What are we trying to get a handle on here? Creativity, a mental activity performed in situations where there is no prior correct solution or answer. In other words, it's the kind of thing where you come up with an idea when it's not like, well, there's a right answer and a wrong answer. It's just that you're trying to do something that's a bit different and you're taking a look at what might be. Another definition is a process of developing new, uncommon, or unique ideas. So feel free to be creative, be imaginative. Give me ideas that you think maybe they stink, but we'll find out. We'll throw them into the pot and see if they survive. Another definition, an experience of thinking that is characterized by a high degree of innovation and originality, divergent thinking and risk-taking. You know, there's convergent thinking. That's where it's kind of a group think. Everybody starts thinking alike. You sit there in a meeting and everybody says, oh, look at that. Oh, that's really cool. Yeah, everybody agrees. That's really cool. And you're sitting there and you think, God, it doesn't look cool to me. I don't think that's going to fly. But you're afraid to speak up because it's hard to do that. There's that sort of cone of silence that descends around you. I don't want to be the guy that looks like the jerk. I don't want to be the one that says the emperor has no clothes on, right? But part of being creative is being willing to be a risk taker, being willing to say, boy, I'm not sure that is right. I think we ought to do it this way. Or maybe that's not going to work because of this. You need to be that person who kind of stirs the pot, who makes things a little bit different. Some of the time we call those people disruptors. If you think about it, and one of the challenges for this week's assignment is to start thinking of people who are the creative people and what it is about them that makes them creative and what things about them could we embrace that might help shake up our thinking. Are there sort of this list of disruptors that we could be talking about in different fields? Music, from Mozart to Elvis to Janis Joplin. Think about the change in the era from Mozart to Janis Joplin, or Jimi Hendrix in the 60s, who sort of created a new genre of music, a new way of dressing even, a new way of looking when they performed that music. Then there's the advent of hip hop, and then there's Tupac, and then nowadays there's Adele. People who break the mold, people who disrupt the status quo. Disruptors come in art in all shapes and sizes. Think of Keith Haring. He started out just doing his art on the subway. I mean, he was a graffiti person who turned out to be one of our most profound artists over time. His images became a certain way of seeing the world. Then there's photography. Look at Matthew Brady back in the Civil War days. He found a group of photographers and he paid for their images, and they would go out to the battlefields with this new technology and bring us things as they were happening in the real world and bring us back images of that in a way that could have never been done before. If you had to take the time to paint the scene, it took too long. Photography captures real life in the moment. Then someone like Alfred Eisenstadt, I just found out that his famous photograph of the sailor and the nurse in Times Square when there was VJ Day and World War II was over is now being painted on the side of a 3-story building. I was very fortunate many years ago to have dinner with Alfred Eisenstadt before he died. He changed the way we thought about photography. Someone like Diane Arbus, who had her own look at the world, very interesting look. She has, many of her books are still bestsellers in the sort of art photography field. Then someone like Annie Leibovitz, all the great covers that she did for Rolling Stone. Rolling Stone itself was a disruptor. It changed the magazine industry from being sort of stodgy and stolid to all of a sudden covering rock and roll, and that was a whole new era. Oh, writers, we can start all the way back. I mean, how far back do you want to go for disruptors? Think about somebody like Mary Shelley, who writes Frankenstein. A woman reading a book like that, making sort of disrupting the world, giving us an insight into all those wild fantasies about a created monster, that still those stories resonate today. I think about Charles Dickens telling those stories about the London streets. Those stories were so popular here in the United States that when the ship would come over, they were written in installments and you'd get them in your weekly newspaper and they'd come over on the ship to the United States. People would be waiting at the dock screaming, "What happened to Little Nell? What's the latest installment? Give me the news." And then we've got writers like Ernest Hemingway, taking writing and taking it down to its essence, more of a journalistic style. At the other ends of the spectrum are Faulkner and James Joyce. Very different kind of writing. They disrupted the world. Norman Mailer wrote about World War II. Then there's writers like James Baldwin who give us a look into cultures other than our own. Many of you may have read Catcher in the Rye, J.D. Salinger. Boy, books for young people were not written that way before J.D. Salinger came along. That's a far cry from the Bobbsey twins. Think about what J.K. Rowling did when she brought out the Harry Potter series. And then there's the Twilight series by Stephanie Meyer. I mean, there are all sorts of people who disrupt the status quo and they open up almost a whole new genre for us. Poetry from Emily Dickinson. People still revere Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass as being a dramatic departure from the past. In my generation, the nice 50s, right, beatniks, Lawrence Ferlinghetti, the poet in San Francisco with his Coney Island of the Mind. In the early 70s, I remember Allen Ginsberg down in Ann Arbor read his poem Howl out loud, and I was there in the audience to hear it, and then we all chanted Aum together. So there are people who disrupt the society and who make us think differently. E.E. Cummings, Ezra Pound, Sylvia Plath, Maya Angelou. Who are the generation's poets for you? Are they the songwriters? Are they the poets? Who are your photographers? Who are the people that matter to you? Technology is disruptive. Alexander Graham Bell invents the telephone and life is different. All of a sudden you can communicate one-on-one with another human being across the country, across the world. Thomas Edison, the light bulb. Film creates movies. Marconi, the radio. Alan Turing, computers. Bill Gates, Steve Jobs, Mark Zuckerberg, those are probably the big 3 tech gurus of our time. We've lost Steve Jobs, but we have Bill Gates and Mark Zuckerberg who are still changing the world with their innovations. We're going to delve a bit into who are these people? What are they like? Are there personality traits we should be looking at? Are there things we can do that we can cultivate in ourselves? So one of the challenges when we're thinking about creativity is how do we measure it? One of the ways we measure creativity is how many good ideas do you come up with? We can count the actual quantity. Are you frequently coming up with good ideas? Are you always contributing? Do you always feel that you have something worthwhile to throw into the pot? What can you do to stimulate more ideas and stimulate more offerings that you put into the pot for other people to decide upon? The other question is, what about the quality of the ideas that you put in the pot? In brainstorming sessions, you often put everything there and determine the quality later, but how are you going to measure that quality? How do we measure originality? How do we determine whether something is unique? There's an old phrase that says that there's nothing new under the sun, and a lot of what we see is that it's an old idea that is rethought. Somebody takes something that happened before and they rethink it. There's a new great book called Imagine, and I'll maybe urge you to buy it along the way, but we're not allowed to assign a book for the class. And they talk about the invention of the Swiffer, those little chemical mops that I think are so awful for the environment, but that's just me. Well, somebody rethought the mop. Who thought you'd need to rethink the mop, for goodness sake? I mean, the mop seemed a pretty obvious thing, right? It's been that way for, decades, if not centuries. But they rethought the mop and they ended up with a hit product, something that was new and different. So the quality of the original idea, taking something old and making it new again. The other big issue in creativity is how complex are your ideas? Do they have nuance? Do you think them through? Do you think all the ways in which you can make them different? Are they fully fleshed out ideas? Do you have the skills to communicate them? I used to work with a man that I always got a big kick out of, because at the magazine that I worked at, we would put out 2 issues a month. And getting the lead-off article was always a big deal. You always wanted to be the person that had the lead-off article. So I would go to the staff meetings where we'd talk over who was going to get the lead-off article this month. Well, my friend Dick got almost all the lead-off articles. Now, I'm not sure his ideas were a whole bunch better than mine, but he sure could sell them. He knew how to communicate and say, well, the reason that we need to put my article first this month is because, boy, this is really going to help people. And he'd go into a big, long explanation, and he would just be so persuasive that you'd have to put his article first. So how is it that you communicate your ideas to others? Do you communicate them effectively? That's part of what we're going to talk about. We're also going to look at flexibility and risk-taking. Part of being creative means being willing to switch gears, being able to switch gears, being able to take a risk and put yourself out there and say, nope, I think that I really want to do it this way, and here's why. Be passionate about what you're doing. Be flexible, but be passionate as well. Take risks. Be curious. If you're not curious about the world, if you're not exploring new ideas, that stifles creativity. Open up your imagination. Open yourself up to suggestions and come up with multiple solutions to a problem. It's not typically that there's 2 sides to every story. There's 50 sides to every story, or there's 50 different solutions in different ways that something could be solved. Make sure that you're exploring all the possibilities. Now I'm going to ask you to do a little something. I'm going to ask you, we always talk about this thinking outside the box. Well, there's a reason that we talk about thinking outside the box, and it's called sort of the 9-dot experiment. Okay, now here are your instructions for the 9-dot exercise. You see the 9 dots in front of you, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Here's what your challenge is. You have to connect those 9 dots using 4 lines. But you cannot, once you start drawing, lift your pen or pencil from the paper, and all the lines have to be straight lines. Let me go over that one more time. You get to use 4 straight lines to connect all the dots, but the trick is you can't lift your pencil in between. They have to be 4 straight lines that you do one right after the other without lifting that pen or pencil from the sheet of paper. So now what you want to do is go copy these 9 dots onto a sheet of paper and go give it a try, and pause the video. See if you can come up with the solution. There's a creative solution to this, so try thinking out of the box. And remember, go take maybe a 10 or 15 minute walk, and maybe all of a sudden something will bubble up. Ready for the solution? Here's how the 4 lines work. Line 1, line 2, line 3, line 4. Are you back? Did you cheat? See the solution? That's why we talk about thinking outside the box. See how those lines go outside the boundaries? It's being able to free ourselves up and think outside the boundaries that make the difference in whether we let ourselves be open to creative ideas. Now, you see these 3 bubbles that are connected, and notice that all the little arrows connect the 3 and they all go back and forth toward one another. It says that if you really want to know what is part of creativity and you want to spark invention and creativity, you need to think in terms of connecting things, an element of discovery. One of the things human brains are very good at is pattern recognition. We see patterns in things. We're lousy at computation. Computers are good at computation. What's 5,282 times 876? Well, there's certain people whose brains are kinked that way that they can do that in their head. Guess what? Probably none of us watching this video right now. But what we are good at is saying, there's a picture of a frog. Boy, I remember something in the past that was from a magazine, and gee, it had a picture of an animal, and maybe if I connected the frog and the animal from the and all of a sudden you're off in a new direction, connecting things that had never been connected before. Humans are very good at pattern recognition and making connections, and that's part of that whole sort of circle as we're seeing this interconnectivity between invention and creativity. It goes along with connection and discovery. All of a sudden seeing something and going, it's that aha or eureka moment. Aha! These two things fit together in a way I hadn't seen before. A lot of it too involves thinking of solutions to problems. Yes, there can be the eureka moment where a great idea comes out of the blue and just smacks you between the eyeballs. But a lot of it is that we're trying to solve something. Something isn't working right. It could be that you're working on a creative project and somehow it just doesn't seem to captivate people. You do a focus group, people take a look and they go, it's not so hot. What are you going to do to make it different? What kind of critical thinking can you employ to go through the steps to say, what can we do to make this grab people? What is it we're missing? What do we need to think about? What strategies or techniques can we do? Do we need humor? Would that get them? Do we want to make them cry? Do we want to make them feel? What do we need? So those are the three bubbles that you see that connect one another, that creativity is also strongly connected to problem solving and critical thinking, and it's also connected to that sort of intuitive kind of connection and discovery, that sort of mysterious process that takes place in the brain where ideas bubble together. So part of it is the linear thinking, the problem solving, the critical thinking, looking at solutions, and part of it is also that intuitive thinking. It's that old left brain, right brain idea. This graphic shows what we think of as the three components of creativity. You see where the Venn diagram overlaps in the middle, and we see that creativity has parts of it that are expertise, creative thinking skills, and motivation. Let's go through them one by one as the components of creativity. That expertise means technical information, procedural and intellectual knowledge. We talked about how people become an expert in a specific field, or even sometimes how we perceive them as being a genius in that field. And he said, you know, if you want to get good at something, it isn't that you're born with it. You're not born with the knowledge you need. He said you need to spend 20 hours a week for about 10 years in order to become an expert at something. You need 10,000 hours worth of focusing on that particular discipline. You want to be a great filmmaker? Spend 40 hours a week for 10 years and you're going to be a pretty good filmmaker after you devote that amount of time, because you're going to learn all of the skills, all of the procedural things, all the technical issues. You want to become a great photographer, first you have to master the camera. It takes time to do that. I don't care how intuitive you are. Today's cameras seem to require an engineering degree. You're going to have to sit down and learn some of that hard work about how that camera works. Once you master that, you can apply it, but you have to get to the point where you're so comfortable with that camera that it's second nature in using it. You don't have to think twice. You know which dial to twist when the scene is too dark or too light or the person's backlit. You need to have all of that at your fingertips, literally. And that's part of sitting down. You know, you got to learn those multiplication tables somewhere along the way. That's the kind of knowledge you have to have, and that's a very important part of creativity. But at the same time, you need those creative thinking skills. Flexible, imagination, sort of, this people approach to problems. Being creative, thinking, bubbling it out, letting that other side of your brain go. Those ideas that bubble up in the shower and those things when you're out walking in nature. The other part that's a really important component, I'm going to hammer you hard on that in this class, is the motivation. If you don't put in the time, if you don't do the structured work, if you're always the person that's lagging, you're not going to get anywhere in these creative fields. These are highly competitive fields. Everybody wants to be a great photographer, a wonderful filmmaker, write a great American novel, produce a fabulous website. And there are plenty of people out there that can do that. And quite honestly, there's a lot of kids who can kind of even sometimes run circles around me when it comes to things that they're doing on the web. So if you want a shot at this, you really have to find that internal motivation. There can be extrinsic. We talk about intrinsic motivation and extrinsic motivation. Intrinsic comes from inside. It's that self-discipline, and that doesn't come easily. So you need that intrinsic, that little whip inside you that says, no, got to stay up and finish this assignment. Nope, I know you're feeling a little bit tired tonight. You'd rather play World of Warcraft, but it's time to go out and do that 15-minute walk in nature, the way Bonnie said, because it's going to free up some ideas. It means actually doing those things and finding an internal motivation that keeps you sparked to want to do this. Certainly the extrinsic or external motivation can be, I want a good grade in the class. I want to be able to get through school so I get my degree. Those are the external forces that are operating on you. But over time, you need to make sure that it develops into an internal motivation, because that's the one that's going to keep you going. The people who are the driven artists are the ones who will go 2 days without food or water or sleep because their minds are on fire with some great new idea that they've come up with. You need to build that capacity within yourself so that you have that sustained motivation to keep you moving towards your goal.